My hand stung as it connected with his face, a sharp crack splitting the air like lightning in a quiet storm. Sergeant Clayton Voss's sunglasses skidded across the concrete, shattering into jagged pieces that glinted under the Memphis sun. Blood trickled from a cut near his eye, and for one frozen moment, the training yard packed with rookie officers and veterans alike stood still, their breaths caught, their eyes wide. Mara Jenkins, a 29-year-old black woman with 4 years on the force, had just slapped my superior in front of everyone. "Don't you ever touch me again," I said, my voice low, trembling with a fury I'd held back too long. Voss, 50-year-old white man with 25 years of untouchable power, stared at me, his shock giving way to something darker: rage, calculation, maybe fear. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and walked away, my boots steady, my heart pounding like a drum. The kids watching from the nearby community center, their basketball game paused, whispered my name like it was a spark. I knew what I'd done wasn't just a slap, it was a declaration, and Memphis, Tennessee, was about to feel its weight. For every black officer who'd been silenced, for every woman who'd been made to feel small, I'd just lit a match, and there was no putting it out. It started that morning, hours before the slap, when I walked into the precinct on Beale Street, the air thick with the hum of radios and the faint rhythm of blues drifting from a street performer outside. I adjusted my vest, the badge on my chest, a symbol I'd once worn with pride, now heavy with the truths I'd learned. 4 years ago I'd joined the force, dreaming of change, inspired by my grandmother, a civil rights marcher who'd faced dogs and hoses with nothing but faith. At 5'4", I wasn't the tallest, but I carried her strength in my bones, her words in my heart. Never let them dim your light. They were etched into a leather cord around my neck, a talisman against the daily grind of being the only black woman in a precinct that often looked past me. I nodded to a rookie, got a half smile back, and ignored the smirk from another officer. You learn what to let go when survival depends on it. Then Voss called my name, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Jenkins, hold up." He leaned against a squad car, coffee in hand, his 6'1" frame looming with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. Voss wasn't just a sergeant, he was a legend in Memphis, a man who dodged complaints like bullets, his charm a mask for something colder. His gray eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, always seemed to size me up, like I was a puzzle he'd already solved. "Yes, Sergeant," I said, keeping my tone even. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Your stance is off. Can't move quick, like that." Let me before I could step back. His hand grazed my hip, fingers lingering with a deliberate slowness that wasn't accidental. 20 feet away, 3 officers glanced over, then looked down, their silence a wall I couldn't climb. My pulse raced, my chest tight with a mix of shame and rage. It wasn't the touch alone, it was the way he did it. Like he knew no one would care. I froze, my voice trapped, my mind screaming. Why did I hesitate? Why didn't I shout? Voss grinned, stepping back. "Just looking out for you, Jenkins. Stay sharp." I nodded, my jaw tight, and walked away, his touch like a bruise I couldn't see. In the locker room, I gripped the sink, staring into the mirror. My eyes were the same, but something behind them had shifted, like a dam starting to crack. I thought of my grandmother's stories, how she'd faced men like Voss with nothing but her dignity. "You're more than their silence," I whispered, but the words felt fragile. I wanted to believe I was stronger, but all I felt was alone, a black woman in a system that rewarded quiet compliance over truth. The moment came later, during drills on the training field. I was coaching rookies, my voice sharp, my movements precise, trying to burn away the morning's weight. Voss appeared, his presence like a storm cloud. He leaned against the fence, smirking, and called out, "Jenkins, you're finally listening, looking better already." The words were a taunt, laced with the same entitlement I'd felt earlier. I stopped, my breath shallow, and turned to face him. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for my lower back, a claim staked in broad daylight. I didn't think, just reacted. My slap landed hard, the sound echoing like a call to war. His sunglasses shattered, his face a mix of shock and fury. "Don't touch me again," I said, my voice steady now, a fire I hadn't known I had. The yard went quiet, the rookies staring, the kids at the community center wide-eyed. I walked away, my heart a wildfire, knowing I'd just changed everything. The aftermath hit fast. The precinct turned cold, like a switch had been flipped. Officers I'd shared coffee with, trained with, now passed me in the halls without a word, their eyes avoiding mine. Conversations died when I entered the break room, cups raised to hide whispers. I kept my head high, my leather cord a steady weight around my neck, but each silence was a cut, deeper than I'd expected. By noon, the retaliation began. My schedule, once full of community patrols, I loved talking to kids at Memphis rec centers. Building trust, was rewritten. I was reassigned to desk duty, sorting reports in a 10-foot by 10-foot office that felt like a cage. I opened my locker, to find my spare vest turned inside out, a photo of my grandmother smiling at my academy graduation ripped in two, scrawled in black ink, "Watch yourself." My stomach twisted, but I snapped a photo, tucked the torn picture in my pocket, and Shut the locker. They wanted me to crumble. But I'd learned from my grandmother, you don't break, you build. Captain Lorraine Hayes, a 55-year-old black woman with 30 years on the force, called me to her office. Her desk was cluttered with commendations, her eyes sharp but guarded. We're reviewing an incident, she said, her voice neutral. Voss says you attacked him. No reason. I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the anger burning inside. He touched me, Captain, twice, in front of witnesses who's going to admit they saw. Hayes sighed, her silence heavy with the weight of her own battles. We'll look into it, she said, but her tone told me the system wasn't on my side. I left her office, the hallway stretching longer than before, each step a reminder of what I was up against. I thought of my grandmother, her voice clear. Never let them dim your light. I wasn't sure I could shine through this, but I'd try. A small spark came from Officer Javier Ruiz, a 26-year-old Latino rookie with a quick smile and a quieter courage. He caught me outside the break room, his voice low. You okay, Jenkins? I forced a nod, trying. He hesitated, then shared his own story. Voss had mocked his accent, called him the border kid in front of the squad, a jab that lingered like a bruise. I saw what he did, Javier said. It's wrong. His words were a thread of hope, proof I wasn't entirely alone. Later I found a note slipped into my locker, written in bold print. You're not invisible. Keep fighting. No name, but it was enough to hold me up. That night I tuned into a community radio show, Memphis Voices, where anonymous callers shared stories of standing up to injustice. One voice, trembling but firm, said, they'll try to break you. Don't let them. I clutched my leather cord, my resolve growing. I started a notebook, scribbling. It's like standing in a fire, but I won't burn. The community reached out in ways I hadn't expected. At a mentorship program I'd helped start, pairing cops with teens at the Orange Mound Community Center, a 14-year-old girl named Tasha slipped me a drawing, a black woman in uniform, fists raised, with hero written in red crayon. You're like my mom, she said, her eyes bright. She never backs down. My throat tightened, not with sadness but with purpose. The kids were watching and they saw me, even when the precinct didn't. Back at work, the retaliation sharpened. My computer access was blocked. A restricted message flashing like a taunt. My name was pulled from the mentorship program, a project I'd poured my heart into. It stung, but I didn't falter. On the precinct's roof, I looked out over Memphis, the Mississippi River glinting in the distance. I whispered my grandmother's words, never let them dim your light. For every person who's felt erased, this was my fight. I didn't know how far it would go, but I knew I'd carry it forward, one truth at a time. The days after my slap echoed with a silence louder than any shout, a quiet that clung to the Memphis precinct like a fog. Iamara Jenkins walked through the hallways on Bell Street, my boots steady but my heart braced for the next blow. At 29, I'd learned to carry the weight of being a black woman in a system that often saw me as a threat, not a shield. The leather cord around my neck etched with my grandmother's words, never let them dim your light, felt heavier now, a reminder of the fight I'd started. Sergeant Clayton Voss's face, bloodied and shocked, haunted me. Not because I regretted the slap, but because I knew he wasn't done. His 25 years of power, his gray eyes that cut through me like I was nothing, promised a reckoning. Yet something else stirred a spark of hope, faint but growing, fed by whispers from those who'd been silenced before me. I wasn't alone, and the truth, buried deep in the precinct's shadows, was starting to surface, demanding to be heard. It began with an envelope slipped onto my desk among stacks of reports, its plain white surface unmarked except for my name, in careful black ink. I found it on a muggy Memphis morning, the air thick with the promise of rain. My hands trembled as I tucked it into my jacket, waiting until I was alone in the records room. A cramped space smelling of old paper and regret. I slit the envelope open, my pulse quickening. Inside was a redacted report, 3 pages of stark truth, 4 complaints against Voss over 12 years, all from women, 3 black, 1 Latina, alleging unwanted touches, whispered threats, and intimidation. Each case was marked inconclusive, with a chilling note, complainant withdrew cooperation. My stomach twisted, not from surprise but from the weight of their defeat. These women hadn't given up, they'd been crushed. Their voices smothered by a system that protected men like Voss. A handwritten slip fell from the pages. They stopped. You don't have to. I clutched it, my eyes burning, not with tears but with a fire I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just my fight, it was theirs. And I wouldn't let it die. I sat at my desk that night, the Memphis skyline flickering through my apartment window, and read the report again. Each line was a scar, a story cut short. I thought of my grandmother, her voice steady as she recounted marching in Selma, how she'd faced men who saw her as less and still held her head high. The truth is a seed, she'd said. Plant it, and it grows. I wanted to believe her, but the precinct's silence felt like concrete, hard and unyielding. Then Officer Javier Ruiz knocked on my door, his usual smile replaced by a nervous edge. At 26, Javier was a rookie with a fire of his own, his Latino heritage, a target for Voss's jabs. "I found something," he said, handing me a USB drive, his voice low. "It's from a patrol car's dash cam, parked 100 feet from the training field that day." I checked the logs. My heart raced as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, and there it was, Voss's voice, smug and taunting, followed by the sharp crack of my slap. Then, a second voice, another officer laughing. "She's got fire, all right." I played it 3 times, my hands shaking, the sound like a key unlocking a door I'd thought was sealed. "This is it," I whispered, not to Javier but to myself. "This is the light." Javier stayed, sitting across from me on my worn couch, his eyes searching mine. "You sure about this, Amara?" he asked. "They'll come for you harder now." I nodded, my resolve like steel. "They're already coming. This just means I can fight back." He told me about his own run-ins with Voss, how the sergeant had mocked his accent, called him the border kid in front of the squad, each word a cut meant to keep him small. I didn't say anything then, Javier admitted, his voice tight, but I'm saying it now. His courage, quiet but real, was a lifeline. I thought of the anonymous note in my locker, "You're not invisible," and realized Javier wasn't the only one watching. Others were out there waiting for someone to break the silence first. I vowed to be that someone, not just for me but for the women in that report, for Javier, for every officer who'd swallowed their truth to survive. The next day I took a risk. I set up a small wooden box in the precinct break room, labeled "Share Your Truth" in bold marker, a safe place for anonymous complaints. I didn't expect much, but by the end of the week, 4 notes appeared about Voss, one about racial slurs from another officer, one simply saying, "Thank you for being brave." Each was a crack in the precinct's armor, proof that silence wasn't absolute. I kept them in a locked drawer, my notebook filling with thoughts. It's like shouting into a void, but the echoes coming back. I felt my grandmother's presence, her strength urging me forward, but I also felt the weight of what I was up against. Voss wasn't just a man, he was a symbol, protected by a system that valued its image over its people. His charm, the way he'd laugh off complaints or win over captains with a handshake, made him slippery, untouchable. But the report, the video, the notes, they were weapons, and I was learning how to wield them. I needed more than evidence, I needed voices. That's when I met Denise Carter and Colonel Vera Miles, 2 retired officers who'd fought their own battles with Voss. We met at a diner on Union Avenue, a cozy spot where the smell of fried okra and coffee wrapped us in a fleeting sense of safety. Denise, a black woman in her 60s, had filed a complaint in 2007, only to be pushed out with bad shifts and worse reviews. "I was young, thought I could win," she said, her voice steady but heavy. They made sure I didn't. Vera, a Latina who'd risen to colonel before retiring, had confronted Voss in 2012, only to find her report lost in the system. "He's not just one man," Vera warned, her eyes sharp. "He's what they let him be." Their stories were like mirrors, reflecting my own fears but also my resolve. They handed me a napkin with 2 names, a civil rights lawyer named Marcus Tate and a journalist from the Memphis Commercial Appeal who'd listened when others wouldn't. I tucked it into my pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. "You're not just fighting for you," Denise said, her hand on mine. "You're fighting for us." My throat tightened, not with sadness but with purpose. I wasn't alone, and that changed everything. Memphis started to notice. At the Orange Mound Community Center, where I'd mentored teens, a group of women organized a truth circle, a safe space to share stories of injustice. I went, my face hidden behind a scarf, and listened as a mother spoke of her son, stopped and frisked, for no reason, her voice breaking but defiant. Another woman, a nurse, talked of being ignored by police when she reported harassment. Their courage lit something in me, a fire that burned brighter than my fear. A grandmother, her hands weathered but strong, pressed a small cross into my palm. "This city sees you," she said, her eyes kind. "Keep going." I clutched across, my heart full, realizing my fight was weaving into Memphis's history of resistance, from Beale Street's blues to the sanitation workers' strike. I wasn't just a cop, I was part of something bigger. Back at the precinct, Voss's shadow grew darker. He hadn't been seen since the slap, but his presence lingered in the tightened lips of officers. The way Captain Lorraine Hayes avoided my eyes in meetings. I caught glimpses of his influence, the way certain veterans rallied around him, whispering in corners, their loyalty a wall I couldn't breach. Voss wasn't just a bully. He was a strategist, his charm a weapon he'd honed over decades. I remembered a story Javier told me, how Voss had once mentored a rookie, only to sabotage his career when the kid questioned an order. That was the man I was up against, not just a sergeant but a systems gatekeeper, his power rooted in fear and favor. Yet the truth was shifting the ground beneath him. The dashcam video, now copied to a secure drive, was my sword. The anonymous notes were my shield, and the women like Denise and Vera were my army, their voices echoing in my heart. I met Marcus Tate, the lawyer, in a small office near the Mississippi River, his desk piled with case files. "This is bigger than Voss," he said, his voice calm but urgent. You're exposing a pattern, Amara, but they'll fight dirty. He laid out the risks. My record scrutinized, my character attacked, my career at stake. I nodded, signing the civil suit with a hand that didn't shake. I'm not doing this for me, I said. I'm doing it for them. Marcus studied me, then smiled faintly. You remind me of my sister, he said. She never backed down either. That night, I sat in my apartment, the radio playing a soft gospel tune from Memphis's Voices. I opened my notebook and wrote, "The truth is a river, it carves its own path." I thought of my grandmother, her marches, her unyielding light. I thought of the women in the report, their stories buried but not gone. I thought of the kids at the community center, their eyes full of hope. For them, for Memphis, for every black woman who'd been told to stay quiet, I'd keep digging, keep fighting, keep shining. The truth I'd uncovered about Sergeant Clayton Voss felt like a live wire in my hands, pulsing with a power I wasn't sure I could control. I, Amara Jenkins, a 29-year-old black woman with 4 years on the Memphis police force, had crossed a line when I slapped Voss, shattering his sunglasses and the precinct's fragile pretense. Now, with a redacted report exposing his history of harassment and a dashcam video capturing his cruelty, I was stepping into a fight bigger than myself. The leather cord around my neck, etched with my grandmother's words, "Never let them dim your light," grounded me as I walked into the Fulton County Courthouse, my heart pounding but my resolve like steel. Memphis was watching, from the kids at the Orange Mound Community Center to the women who'd shared their stories in the Truth Circle. This wasn't just about MIT, it was about every voice the system had tried to silence. Every black woman told to stay quiet. Every officer like me who'd felt the weight of a badge that didn't always protect them. The courtroom was my battlefield now, and I was ready to let the truth speak, loud and clear. In a city that had seen too much silence, the courthouse doors loomed heavy, their glass reflecting the Memphis skyline as I stepped inside, my boots echoing on the tile floor. I clutched the envelope with my evidence, the report, the video, the anonymous notes from the precinct's Share Your Truth box feeling its weight like a promise I'd made to Denise Carter and Colonel Vera Miles, the retired officers who'd fought Voss before me. My lawyer, Marcus Tate, walked beside me, his calm voice a steady anchor. "They'll try to twist this, Amara," he warned, his eyes sharp but kind. "Stay focused. You're not just fighting Voss, you're fighting what he represents." I nodded, my throat tight, thinking of my grandmother's marches, her courage against a world that tried to break her. I'd signed the civil suit knowing the cost: my career, my reputation, maybe even my safety, but I also knew the cost of staying silent. It was too high, not just for me but for the women whose stories lay buried in that report, for the kids who saw me as a hero, for Memphis itself. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension, the judge's bench raised like a silent judge of its own. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped to keep them still, my leather cord a quiet reminder of who I was. Behind me, Denise and Vera took their seats, their presence a lifeline, their faces calm but fierce. A handful of community members, some from the Truth Circle, others drawn by whispers of my story, filled the benches, their eyes steady with support. Officer Javier Ruiz slipped in late, his rookie nerves hidden behind a quick nod. I caught his gaze, grateful for the ally who'd risked his own standing to hand me the dashcam video. Voss entered last, his 6'1" frame stiff, his usual charm, replaced by a tight jaw and eyes that darted too quickly. He wasn't the untouchable sergeant today. He was a man on trial, his power fraying at the edges. I saw it in the way he avoided my gaze, the way his lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. But I also saw the system behind him, the captains who'd looked away, the officers who'd laughed off his jabs, the precinct that had let him thrive for 25 years. The hearing began with a dry recitation of charges: misconduct, harassment, abuse of authority. But the words felt alive, each one a brick in the wall I was building. Marcus presented the evidence, his voice clear and unyielding. Then came the video, projected onto a screen that bathed the room in cold light. The footage played Voss's mocking voice, my slap, the shatter of his sunglasses, and that damning laugh from another officer: "She's got fire, all right." The room froze, the sound echoing like a gunshot in a quiet street. I didn't look at Voss, I looked at the judge. A black woman in her 60s whose face stayed unreadable but whose eyes lingered on the screen a moment longer than necessary. My chest tightened, not with fear but with hope. This was the truth, raw and undeniable, and it was finally being heard. When I took the stand, my voice didn't waver, though my hands shook beneath the table. "I didn't slap him to hurt him," I said, my eyes on the judge. "I slapped him because he thought he could touch me, diminish me, and no one would care. I did it for the women who came before me, whose complaints were buried. I did it so the system would have to answer." The words poured out, steady like a river, carrying the weight of every silenced voice I'd uncovered. I spoke of the report, the 4 women whose stories had been dismissed, their courage erased by inconclusive stamps. I spoke of the precinct's silence, how officers turned away when Voss's hand grazed me, how the system protected him because he wore its badge. The courtroom was still, not with shock but with a listening quiet. the kind that comes when truth cuts through lies. I stepped down, my heart pounding, feeling my grandmother's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. I'd spoken, and Memphis was listening. Voss's defense was a desperate scramble. His lawyer painted me as volatile, a troublemaker who'd overreacted to friendly advice. But the video was a wall they couldn't climb. When Voss took the stand, his charm faltered, his voice thin as he denied the touch, denied the pattern, denied the laughter caught on tape. Marcus pressed him, citing the prior complaints, each one a shadow he couldn't shake. For women, Sergeant Marcus said, his voice like a blade. All dismissed. Why should we believe you now? Voss stammered, his gray eyes flickering with something I hadn't seen before, fear, not of me, but of the truth, now laid bare in a room he couldn't control. The judge's gaze was steady, her pen poised, and I knew she saw him for what he was, not just a man, but a symbol of a system that had failed too many. The verdict came faster than I'd expected, like a stone dropping into still water. Guilty of misconduct, harassment, and abuse of authority, the judge said, her voice clear and final. Sergeant Voss, you are suspended without pay, pending further investigation. The words hit like a release, not of triumph, but of weight lifted. Voss sat motionless, his face pale, his hands unmoving. I didn't look at him, I looked at Denise and Vera, their eyes wet with a pride that mirrored my own. Javier gave me a small nod, his relief palpable. The community members in the back whispered, their murmurs a quiet wave of support. I stepped outside into the Memphis sunlight, the air warm and heavy, and felt a new kind of exhaustion, not the ache of surviving, but the ache of being seen. I clutched my leather cord, my grandmother's words alive in my chest, never let them dim your light. The precinct felt different when I returned, not because the walls had changed, but because the air had. Officers who'd once avoided me now met my eyes, some with guilt, others with a cautious respect. Captain Lorraine Hayes, who'd been so guarded before, called me to her office. We're revising our complaint process, she said, her voice softer now, her eyes meeting mine. Your case, it's opened eyes. I nodded, unsure if I trusted her words, but grateful for the shift. Javier stopped me in the hallway, his smile back but tempered. You did it, Amara, he said. No, I corrected, my voice low. We started it. He nodded, understanding. And I saw in him the same fire I'd felt, a rookie, ready to fight for something better. Memphis itself seemed to rise with me. At a public forum in the city council chambers, organized by the Truth Circle, 150 people gathered to hear stories of injustice. I sent a letter, read anonymously by a pastor, my words ringing out. Silence isn't safety, it's surrender. We deserve a system that protects us all. The crowd applauded, their voices a chorus that carried me. A scholarship fund stand was announced, aimed at supporting black women in law enforcement. I stood at the back, my heart full, as a young woman approached, her eyes bright. I'm applying to the academy because of you, she said, handing me a braided bracelet with a single bead. Hope I wore it next to my grandmother's cord, a new talisman for a new fight. The community's support grew louder. A 5K run through Overton Park, organized by local activists, drew 400 runners. Their shirts printed with "Truth Speaks Loud." The event raised $8,000 for victims of misconduct, and I ran among them, my badge tucked away, feeling the city's pulse aligned with mine. A local DJ on Memphis Voices dedicated a song to the officer who broke the silence, and the lyrics echoed in my head as I crossed the finish line. One spark, one stand, lights up the land. At a corner store, an elderly man slipped me a note. You're our daughter now. I tucked it into my notebook where I wrote, the truth isn't just mine, it's Memphis's. But Voss's shadow lingered. I heard whispers of his allies rallying, officers loyal to him spreading rumors, calling me a troublemaker. A new memo tightened conduct rules, a veiled threat. My radio calls went unanswered, my assignments dwindled. Voss wasn't in the precinct, but his influence was a ghost, his power rooted in years of favors and fear. I knew he'd fight back, not with fists but with the system's weight. The verdict against Sergeant Clayton Voss was a crack in the foundation of the Memphis precinct. But it wasn't the end, it was a beginning. Amara Jenkins, a 29-year-old black woman who dared to slap a man who thought he could diminish me, stood taller now, my badge no longer just a symbol of duty but a promise to reshape it. The leather cord around my neck, etched with my grandmother's words, never let them dim your light, felt lighter, as if the weight of silence had begun to lift. Yet, the fight wasn't over. Voss's shadow lingered, his allies whispering in corners their loyalty, a reminder that systems don't change easily. But Memphis was changing, its pulse quickening with every step I took. From the precinct's halls to the streets where community voices rose like a chorus, I'd ignited a spark, and now it was a fire, spreading through the city, through me, through every person who'd been told their truth didn't matter. This was my new dawn, and I was determined to make it shine for every black woman, every officer, every soul who'd been silenced. The precinct on Beale Street felt different, not because the walls had changed, but because I walked through the hallways, my boots steady, my eyes meeting those of officers who'd once looked away. Some nodded now, their gestures tentative but real. Others still turned, their silence a stubborn holdout of Voss's influence. I'd been promoted to internal affairs, a role I hadn't sought but accepted, knowing it was a chance to dig deeper into the patterns that had protected men like Voss for 25 years. My office, a small space with a single window overlooking Memphis's skyline, was my new battleground. I hung my grandmother's photo, her smile fierce from her civil rights days, next to the braided hope bracelet from the young woman at the city council forum. They were reminders of why I fought, not for glory but for the women whose complaints had been buried, for the kids who saw me as a hero, for a city that deserved better. My first case file landed with a thud, a woman's name and a timestamp, no witnesses listed. I opened it, my coffee growing cold, and read the details. Another officer, another claim of harassment, another inconclusive waiting to happen. I thought of Denise Carter and Colonel Vera Miles, the retired officers who'd shared their stories of defeat, their voices now part of my strength. I wrote in my notebook, every file is a story, and I won't let them end in silence. I'd started a training program on racial bias, co-designed with Captain Lorraine Hayes, who'd begun to see me not as a troublemaker but as a force. The program rolled out to 150 officers, sparking tense but honest conversations in the precinct's break room. I overheard a veteran say, "Jenkins is right, we've looked away too long." It wasn't a victory, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of complicity that had shielded Voss. Voss himself was gone. His suspension a public wound, but his presence haunted the precinct. His photo, once a fixture in the hallway, had been removed, leaving a faint outline like a ghost. I heard whispers of his allies, officers he'd mentored, captains he'd charmed, spreading rumors that I'd overplayed my hand. One left a note on my desk. "You won't last." I tucked it into my evidence folder, my resolve unshaken. Voss wasn't just a man, he was a systems gatekeeper, his power built on years of favors, backroom deals, and a charm that masked his cruelty. I remembered a story Officer Javier Ruiz had told me, how Voss had once guided a rookie only to sabotage his promotion when the kid questioned a shady arrest. That was the Voss I faced, not just a harasser but a strategist who thrived on control. I knew he'd fight back, not in court now but through the system's slow, grinding machinery, and I had to be ready. Javier became my anchor, his rookie nerves giving way to a quiet courage that mirrored my own. He stopped by my office, his smile brighter but his eyes still wary. "They're talking about you, Amara," he said, leaning against my doorframe. "Some say you're a hero, others not so much." I nodded, grateful for his honesty. "What do you say?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "I say you're making it easier for the rest of us to speak." His words hit deep, a reminder that my fight was his too. Javier had faced his own battles, Voss's border kid taunts, the sidelong glances from veterans who saw his Latino heritage as a liability. He'd started leaving notes in the Share Your Truth box, small confessions of bias he'd witnessed, each one a step toward breaking the silence. I saw in him the same fire I'd felt, a young officer choosing to stand, not hide. Memphis's community carried me forward in ways I hadn't expected. At the Orange Mound Community Center, where I'd once mentored teens, a group of kids organized a courage walk, a march from the center to the National Civil Rights Museum. I joined them, out of uniform, my badge tucked away, feeling the rhythm of their chants. "Truth speaks loud." A 15-year-old named Malik, who'd drawn me as a hero in red crayon, walked beside me, his voice steady. "You're like my aunt." He said she fought too, but nobody listened. I squeezed his shoulder, my throat tight. "We're listening now," I said, and he smiled, his eyes bright with hope. The walk ended at the museum, where a small bronze plaque had been installed. Etched with "Courage breaks silence." I touched it, feeling my grandmother's spirit, her marches alive in this moment. The kids saw me, not just as a cop but as a symbol, and I vowed to live up to it. The city's support grew louder. A local poet, inspired by my story, performed at a festival on Beale Street, her words ringing out. One hand, one spark, lit up the dark. The crowd cheered, their applause a wave that carried me. A scholarship fund, Amara Stand, gained traction, raising $12,000 to support black women in law enforcement. I met one recipient, a 22-year-old named Keisha, who hugged me and said, "I'm here because you didn't quit." Her words settled in my chest, a warmth that outshone the precinct's cold. At a grocery store, an elderly woman pressed a handwritten card into my hand. "You're Memphis's daughter now." I added it to my notebook where I wrote, "The light isn't just mine, it's this." But the precinct wasn't done fighting. My assignments dwindled further. My radio calls met with static or delays. A new policy required pre-approval for internal affairs investigations, a clear jab at my work. I heard rumors of Voss meeting with allies, planning his return, his charm still working its magic on those who feared change more than truth. Captain Hayes warned me privately, her voice low. "They're watching you, Amara, be careful." I nodded, seeing in her eyes a flicker of her own battles, a black woman who'd climbed the ranks by navigating the same system I was challenging. "I'm not stopping," I said, and she gave a small smile, part pride, part worry. I knew Voss's power wasn't going, it was shifting, regrouping, waiting for a chance to strike. But I was ready, armed with the truth and a city that was starting to believe in it. I took a new step, one I hadn't planned. I launched a podcast, Voices Unbound, a platform for anonymous stories of injustice in law enforcement. The first episode, recorded in my apartment with a borrowed mic, featured a disguised voice mind sharing the story of the slap, the report, the verdict. Within a week, it had 5,000 downloads, messages flooding in from officers, civilians, even teens like Malik. One wrote, "Your voice gave me mine." I cried reading it, not from sadness but from the weight of connection. The podcast became a beacon, a digital version of the Share Your Truth box, and Javier volunteered to help, his tech skills turning our stories into a movement. "We're building something," he said, his eyes bright. I nodded, feeling the fire spread. The precinct's resistance didn't fade. A file I'd flagged for investigation was misplaced, a subtle warning. Officers loyal to Voss spread whispers, calling me divisive, their words a slow poison. But I didn't break. I visited the National Civil Rights Museum again, standing before a photo of my grandmother's march, her face fierce and unbroken. I thought of Denise and Vera. Their story is now part of my fight. I thought of Javier, his courage growing with every note he left. I thought of Keisha, Malik, and the women whose complaints had been buried. I opened my notebook and wrote, "The dawn is here, and it's ours." The precinct could push back. Voss could scheme, but Memphis was rising, and I was its voice. For every black woman told to stay quiet, for every officer who'd swallowed their truth, I'd keep fighting, keep shining, until the light was too bright to ignore. The light I'd kindled in Memphis had grown from a spark to a steady flame, one that burned through the silence that once cloaked the truth. I, Amara Jenkins, a 29-year-old black woman who'd dared to slap Sergeant Clayton Voss for his harassment, stood at the edge of a new dawn. My badge transformed from a burden into a vow. The leather cord around my neck, etched with my grandmother's words, "Never let them dim your light," was my anchor, tying me to her legacy, to the women whose complaints had been buried, to a city that had risen to meet me. The precinct on Beale Street was no longer a fortress of secrets. It was a place where truth was starting to take root. Yet Voss's shadow lingered, his allies scheming in quiet corners, a reminder that systems cling to power like roots to soil. But I wasn't alone. Memphis, its people, its history, its heart stood with me, and together, we were forging a path where justice wasn't just a dream but a promise kept. This was my legacy, not just for me but for every black woman, every officer, every soul told their voice didn't matter. And I would carry it forward until the light was too bright to ignore. My office in Internal Affairs was my haven, a space where sunlight spilled through a narrow window, warming the desk where I unraveled stories of injustice. I hung a new photo beside my grandmother's fierce smile, a snapshot of Malik, the 15-year-old from the Courage Walk, holding his red crayon drawing of me with pride. Next to it was the hope bracelet from Keisha, the young woman whose path to the police academy I'd helped clear. Each morning I opened a new case file, each one a life demanding to be heard. One detailed a rookie's claim of racial bias in assignments. Another described a female officer's ignored report of intimidation. I read them as promises, echoes of Denise Carter and Colonel Vera Miles, the retired officers whose battles had fueled mine. In my notebook I wrote, "Every story is a step toward justice." The racial bias training program I'd co-designed with Captain Lorraine Hayes was spreading, now reaching 250 officers, their debates spilling into break rooms, challenging the silence that had once shielded Voss. I overheard a young officer say, "Jenkins showed us we can't keep looking away." It wasn't a full victory, but it was a shift, a crack in the precinct's old walls. Voss's absence was a wound, his suspension a public reckoning, but his influence was a ghost that refused to fade. Whispers reached me of his plans of potential appeal, meetings with loyalists, a campaign to paint me as a divisive force. His 25 years on the force had built a network of favors, his charm a weapon that still swayed some. I remembered Officer Javier Ruiz's story of how Voss had mentored a rookie only to sabotage him for questioning an order. That was the Voss I faced, a man whose cruelty was matched by his cunning, his power rooted in a system that rewarded loyalty over truth. His allies left subtle barbs, a memo questioning my impartiality in internal affairs, a case file ID flagged marked incomplete without reason. Captain Hayes pulled me aside, her eyes heavy with her own history as a black woman in the force. "They're still circling Amara," she said, her voice low. "Voss doesn't let go easily." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Neither do I." Her faint smile, a mix of pride and caution, told me she understood. Javier was my pillar, his rookie hesitance now a bold resolve. He co-hosted our podcast, Voices Unbound, his voice steady as we shared anonymous stories of injustice. Our latest episode, recorded in my apartment with the hum of Memphis traffic outside, featured a retired officer's tale of being sidelined for her race. It hit 12,000 downloads, with messages pouring in. You gave me hope to speak. Javier's eyes lit up as we read them. His own pain voices bored a kid taunts fueling his fight. We're changing things, Amara, he said, his Latino heritage a bridge to my struggle as a black woman. He'd added his own story to the podcast, his voice breaking as he described the shame of staying silent. His courage was a mirror to mine, a reminder that this fight belonged to us all. Memphis's embrace was my strength. At a Day of Truth festival on Beale Street, 400 people gathered, their laughter and music a testament to the city's spirit. A local singer performed One Hand, One Light, its lyrics ringing. She broke the silence, gave us defiance. I stood in the crowd, out of uniform, feeling their eyes, elders, teens, families seeing me as one of their own. Malik ran up, his new drawing showing me with a badge and a torch. You're still my hero, he said, his voice steady. I hugged him, my heart full, thinking of my grandmother's marshes, her fight alive in this boy. Keisha, now weeks from starting the academy, joined us, her hope bracelet gleaming. You made this possible, she said, her eyes fierce. I clutched her hand, feeling her future as my own. The city's support grew bolder. A mobile app, Truth Track, launched by a local coder inspired by my story, let users report misconduct anonymously, linking them to advocates like Marcus Tate, my lawyer. It logged 150 submissions in a month, each a voice breaking free. I added a message to its homepage. Your truth is power. Use it. At a church near the National Civil Rights Museum, a grandmother from the Truth Circle gave me a pendant carved with strength, her hand steady. This is for your fight, she said. I hung it in my office, beside Moloch's drawing and Keisha's bracelet, a growing tapestry of courage. A mural near Overton Park, showing a black woman breaking chains with Amara's stand in bold, became a pilgrimage site. I passed it daily, my chest tight with pride. The precinct's resistance didn't vanish. A key investigation I'd pushed was delayed. A bureaucratic jab. Voss's allies spread rumors, calling me overzealous, their words a slow drip of poison. I heard he was rallying support, his charm still working on those who feared change, but I didn't waver. I launched Lightbearer as a mentorship program pairing officers with teens, starting with 25 kids at the Orange Mound Community Center. Malik joined, his drawing now the program's logo. At a summit there, I spoke to 60 teens, my voice clear. Your voice is your strength, don't let anyone take it. A girl asked, what if they ignore us? I touched my leather cord, smiling, keep speaking, they'll hear you. The applause was a wave, my grandmother's spirit alive in their cheers, reflecting on my journey. I sat in my apartment, the Mississippi River glinting under the Memphis moon. I opened my notebook, writing, I didn't fight for me alone. I fought for the women in the report, for Denise and Vera, for Malik and Keisha, for every voice the system tried to silence. I'd learned that courage isn't loud, it's steady, a refusal to bend even when the world pushes back. I learned that truth is a seed, as my grandmother said, growing stronger with every voice that joins it. I learned that community heart can turn a single act into a movement. The slap was my spark, but the real fire was the city, the people who saw me, who stood with me. For every black woman told to stay quiet, for every officer who swallowed their truth, I'd built a light that wouldn't fade. I thought of the question that lingered, one I'd asked myself in the darkest moments. If you were in a situation, like mine, facing abuse of power, rank, or harassment in your workplace, how would you approach it to achieve the best outcome? I'd learned there's no perfect path, but I'd start with truth, speaking it, even when it shakes you. I'd find allies, like Javier, who share your fight. I'd lean on community, like the Truth Circle, whose support can carry you. I'd document everything, like the dashcam and notes, because evidence is your shield. And I'd hold fast to your why. Mine was my grandmother, the women before me, the kids after me. What's yours? I looked out at Memphis, its lights a constellation of hope, and knew my promise was kept. The dawn was here, a vow to every soul who'd been silenced. Your voice matters, and it will be heard.